Somewhere in the last month, you have heard a baby crying and had no way to stop it. Maybe it was 4 rows behind you on a plane, or through a wall at 2 in the morning. Something in you tightened, and not because you are unkind. Today we are opening the file on where that sound came from and on who it was actually calling. There is a satisfying version of this story going around online. It says ancient babies hardly cried at all because a screaming infant in the dark would have been a dinner bell out on the savannah, so evolution must have quietly bred the crying out of them. That is a reasonable conclusion. It is also testable, and it has been tested. So a number has already formed. Next to a baby crying in a modern house, how much did a baby cry in a hunter-gatherer camp where nobody was ever put down and nobody was ever alone? The belief sitting behind your number is not a silly one, and it has real evidence underneath it. In most modern Western homes, a baby sleeps somewhere that is not against a body. Usually that means a cot beside the bed, and sometimes it means a different room entirely. If that baby needs something, the only tool it has is escalation. It squirms and nobody comes. It fusses and nobody comes. So it opens its lungs because that is the setting that works. For almost the whole of human history, that gap never existed. Anthropologists working with foraging societies found infants carried against a caregiver through most of the daylight hours, fed in short bursts about 4 times an hour, and sleeping beside their mothers at night. Among the Kumsan of the Kalahari, a baby in the early months was in physical contact with somebody roughly 90% of the time, and something like 8 out of every 10 cries got an answer. Hold those two worlds side by side, and the conclusion writes itself. Take away the weight, and you take away the reason to scream. That is exactly what 4 researchers set out to check. In 1991, Ronald Barr, Melvin Connor, Roger Bakeman, and Lauren Adamson published data on 46 Kumsan infants in northwestern Botswana. This was not a survey of what parents remembered. Observers sat with these babies and timed them in 5-second intervals across the first 2 years of life. Then they held the results up against a Dutch sample, meaning babies raised in cots inside modern industrialized infant care. The Kum babies cried the same number of times. There were not fewer bouts, just the same count of separate crying episodes in every waking hour. And the notorious early peak, the one every exhausted parent knows, where crying climbs through the first weeks and tops out somewhere around 6 weeks to 3 months, showed up in these babies too. It showed up in a camp where a baby was almost never set down and where almost every sound got answered. One thing did change, and it changed a lot. Total time spent crying came out at roughly half. So the crying splits into 2 separate questions, and everyone has been answering the wrong one. How often a baby cries appears to belong to the baby. How long each cry lasts belongs to the adults in earshot. The researchers concluded that the early peak is probably not a Western invention at all, and may simply be something the human species does. That drags the original problem straight back into the room. If babies were always this loud, the sound went out across open country night after night, and everything with ears could hear it. That part is not hypothetical. In 2023, a team played recordings of hominid infant cries to Nile crocodiles in Morocco, and the animals came toward the speaker. The more distress the cry carried in its sound, the harder they came. The researchers were careful to note that some of those animals might have been responding as parents rather than as hunters. Even so, a human baby in distress produces something a crocodile can read, and crocodiles were in the water where our ancestors drank. So the cost was real, and the signal stayed anyway, which means it was buying something worth more than the risk. And to work out what, you have to ask who the cry was talking to. The obvious answer is the mother, and she is most of it. She did most of the holding, and she was the most consistent responder, and nothing in the later research has overturned that. She was just very rarely the only one moving. Later analysis of those same Kung observations found that roughly a third of crying bouts were settled entirely by somebody who was not the mother, an aunt, or an older child who happened to be closer. Across all the bouts, other caregivers were involved about half the time, and when a cry ran past 30 seconds and the mother came, she arrived with company in about half of those cases. That fits a problem at the center of human biology. Our infants are the most expensive offspring in the primate world, and by far the slowest to become useful. No mother working alone could carry that bill, which is why human child-rearing has never been a solo activity anywhere it has been studied. And here is the part that should be strange to everyone. Crying is expensive. It burns energy a newborn can barely spare, and as those crocodiles showed, it broadcasts a position to anything that hunts. A trait that costly usually gets worn down by selection until it is quieter or narrower or rarer. This one never was. Instead, the same curve turns up everywhere anyone has measured it. It did that in Dutch houses, and it did that in Kalahari camps, in babies who were held about 90% of the time and answered almost every time they made a sound. So the crying is not something being done to those babies by the way they are raised. It is something the babies are doing. And the honest position, the one held by the researchers who have spent careers on this, is that nobody has proven why. Maybe the cry is a truthful report of need. Maybe it is closer to bargaining, a way of pulling more care out of the adults nearby than the situation strictly requires. A third proposal says it is an advertisement, an infant proving it is worth the investment. The most thorough review of the evidence came down on none of them. That reframes what you felt on the plane. The tightening in your chest when a stranger's baby starts up is not intolerance, and it is not a character flaw. Infant cries reliably activate the parts of an adult brain that handle attention and empathy in people who have never had a child of their own. Whatever that sound is for, it was built to be answered by whoever is nearest, and on that plane, the nearest person was you. And almost every parent alive today is running that ancient signal in an arrangement it never had to work in before. In a Kalahari camp, a good share of those cries were somebody else's to settle. In a flat at 3 in the morning, all of them belong to one person who has been awake since Tuesday. That number from earlier, whatever it settled on, was almost certainly too low. The cries came just as often. It was roughly the same count in a camp where no baby was ever put down and help was seconds away. What changed was never the baby. It was only ever how long the sound had to keep going before somebody came. So when that cry goes on, and a third of it was never the mother's job to answer in the first place, who is it actually failing? Is it failing the parent who cannot make it stop? Or is it failing the rest of us who are standing close enough to hear it? The full dossier on this and 9 other findings about being human is linked below, and it is free. Next week, we are opening the file on why you cannot remember a single day of your own first 3 years, and why your brain did that deliberately.